Good day and welcome to the webinar, Risk-Based Testing for IoT Systems. We're going to be starting momentarily, just giving folks another 30 seconds or so to join, and then we'll be right on our way. All right, we're going to get started. I am Ed Adams. I'm your presenter for today's webcast on testing IoT systems, risk-based testing. Before we get started, just a couple of housekeeping items for you. You should be able to submit questions as part of the Bright Talk webinar portal. You should be able to see a place where you just click and enter in questions. I do not have a moderator with me on this webcast, so at the end I will answer a couple of questions directly, and then we'll revert to email or other follow-up if we can't get to them live. You should also have a place to provide feedback during the presentation, and this is being recorded, and it will be made available for replay after the event. At the end of the presentation, I have my contact information, and if you want to request the slides directly, please just send me an email and do so. With that, let us begin talking about risk-based security testing for IoT systems. As I mentioned, I am Ed Adams. Just a little bit about me on this slide. But I was trained as a software engineer, mechanical engineer, and in addition to my full-time job as CEO of Security Innovation, I'm also a research fellow for the Ponemon Institute, which is a think tank of privacy and security research, and also a Privacy by Design ambassador for the Information Commissioner of Canada. Many years ago, when I was quite younger, I built non-lethal weapon systems for the federal government, much like what you see pictured here. Something like a retrofitted scuba tank with fast hardening foam, or net with perimeter weights mounted and shot out of a rifle to ensnare victims. But after I got out of that, I got into software, never looked back more than 20 years ago. We're going to be talking about 4 simple agenda points. First, we're going to be talking about risks of IoT devices. And then I'm going to jump straight into the risk-based testing essentials. I will have a few slides on IoT device testing specifically. However, the majority of this presentation is meant to be a non-technical risk-based security assessment approach for IoT systems, as opposed to how to hack and reverse engineer. But I will touch upon that in the IoT device considerations part of the webinar. And then we'll wrap up with a section on securing our digital future, and really what that's all about is just practical tips, specific guidance, and questions to be able to ask yourself as you are designing, deploying, and operating IoT systems. So we'll begin with so many connected things in the world. Not a surprise to any of us. As we know, our automobiles are connected to the internet, our homes are connected to the internet, whether it's a refrigerator or a door lock, a thermostat, even gasoline pumps, very much connected things. In fact, on that one particular pump shown, there's a number of different IoT devices embedded in there. In fact, there's so many connected things in the world that this year we're going to pass 25 billion connected devices, which is just phenomenal growth. It's nearly double where we were just 4 years ago. And the pace is not going to be slowing down. As you can see, projection that 6 years hence, we're going to be at over 75 billion connected devices, which, again, just a remarkable number, staggering, in fact. So let's take a short trip down memory lane and talk a little bit about connected devices. I heard from folks that I had a very low voice, so hopefully this is better. I removed my headset and I'm speaking directly into my handset. So apologies for the low voice earlier, but hopefully this is much better. So the good old days of connected devices. They were indeed just that, devices. There was very little code in them, whether it was a camcorder or an EKG machine as pictured. So that very little code compile where you had to be physically present to make any changes to the device, and if you wanted to share data, then you needed to do that by either printing something or taking a picture, sending it along, or having a cash payment transaction as opposed to digital. And thank you, by the way, for those folks that have offered feedback that the volume is better. I appreciate it. Again, I have no moderator on the call, so I'm on my own, flipping between slides and questions and feedback from the audience. So I appreciate the patience, but thank you for the feedback. Please do keep it coming. So from the good old days of devices, we enter today's world of devices where we're still running on code, but now it's a lot of code, a tremendous amount of code, as a matter of fact, and they're meant to serve multiple different purposes. And the code that we're running, you don't really have to wait for any type of changes to the code. There's often connections via Wi-Fi or cellular connection, and the data that is shared is always digital, often instantaneous. So car washes today accept mobile payments and credit card payments. Those camcorders and our digital cameras, the EKGs, are shown on tablets. And again, sticking with the connected car theme here, vacuum pumps, gas stations, and even tire inflators are technically all connected devices sharing digital data. And all, of course, right before attack, which is where we'll be talking next. I'm going to bring up several examples of IoT security breaches. Most of this will be familiar to you, or some of it will be familiar to you, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. This one happened just a few years ago, called the Mirai botnet attack. It's also known as the attack on Dyn. Dyn is a company out of New Hampshire in the US that essentially routes internet traffic. They provide domain name service, or DNS. And what ended up happening is that millions of IoT devices were infected with this Mirai malware, and they flooded Dyn with traffic, creating a distributed denial of service. And then all of these online services that you see listed here, from Amazon.com to DirecTV to the New York Times and BBC, were completely unavailable for sometimes half a day, and in a couple of cases more than 2 days, including Twitter. Sometimes I wish Twitter were disabled right now, but it is what it is. So some additional trouble in the IoT world. St. Jude's Medical, which is a remarkable hospital. They do fantastic work for sick children. They don't turn down anyone. But they unfortunately had some implantable cardiac devices that had security vulnerabilities, and it allowed for remote access. It allowed, just with a couple of clicks in software, to deplete the battery or deliver a shock, and obviously that's not exactly what you want when you've got sick kids. Similarly, the Owlet Wi-Fi baby heart monitor, it's again supposed to allow parents to understand when the child might be having some kind of arrhythmia, but there was a connectivity element, again, made it completely exploitable. And then this one, the third one here, the TrendNet, this is one of my favorites. They called it the Secure View camera, which is an unfortunate name because they had a couple of really horrible vulnerabilities. The faulty software in the camera allowed anyone who could obtain the camera's address to be able to see and listen through it. And as we know, discovering an IP address is a trivial matter. But to make matters worse, all user login credentials were transmitted in clear text, and then the mobile application stored all that information in clear text. So again, great intention with a lot of these devices, but because of careless manufacturer configuration in these cases, the security vulnerabilities were pretty stark. And that's one thing that we always need to consider when conducting risk-based testing or assessment of IoT devices is what security vulnerabilities or risk are we inheriting from the device manufacturers themselves, because in many cases you can't change or control the software or the vulnerabilities on the devices themselves, as is the case with this next slide. And I won't bother talking much about the FTC versus D-Link, but I will talk a little bit about John Deere. Many folks are familiar with farm tractors. John Deere is a very large manufacturer of tractors, and when a tractor breaks down on a farm, what does the farmer want to do? They want to repair the tractor and get it back into production, of course, because that downtime can cost the farmer money. However, today's tractors made by John Deere are very much IoT devices. And in fact, there's so many connected elements and so much software in the devices that John Deere didn't allow farmers to repair their tractors because it was infringing upon software license agreements and device license agreements. Now, today's modern tractors are very expensive. So instead of buying a tractor like a farmer may have done in the past, most commonly the tractor is leased. That allows for refreshment of vehicles after a couple of years, etc. However, the ownership remains with John Deere and not the farmer. So the farmers were not allowed to repair their tractors, and they actually got together and filed a class action suit to dispute their right to repair. And it caused a lot of heartache for John Deere, but ultimately the farmers and John Deere sorted out the problems. But again, just an example of the poor farmer thinks they're just buying a tractor, but what they're doing is they're technically deploying an IoT system, and elements of that IoT system are not, you can't tamper with it because you're violating, in some cases, law, and in this case, a license agreement. And then skimmers, one of my favorite IoT security threats. The old days of skimmers, which is the top picture here, basically just a device that connected, fit right over the credit card swiping slot, and all it did was there was a mag strip reader, and it just collected a whole bunch of credit card information. And what criminals typically would do is they would just drive up and down an interstate, installing these skimmers on gasoline pumps, typically that were right off of the highway because that was the most convenient for them. And, spend several days driving down the interstate doing this, and then wait for a week or 2 weeks, and then drive back in the other direction and collect all the skimmers with all the data on it. Well, that was a very clever attack, but it's also very manual intensive and requires a lot of hardware as well. Today's skimmers are most likely embedded into the pump themselves. In fact, usually is less than 30 seconds. You can crack the lock on a pump and install a skimmer inside. And what the skimmers are doing now is that they are collecting the information, but they're transmitting it wirelessly automatically. So it's kind of instant access to a stolen credit card. And then the next evolution of skimmers are going to be embedded devices that they don't just steal the credit card information, but it's essentially would be equivalent, as one of our engineers here says, to putting a computer directly on your network, because these small profile devices are actually quite powerful, as we've all seen with the advent of first smartphones and things like Raspberry Pis. So that's the direction that we're going in. And I'll stop talking about threats because, again, familiar to a lot of us, but I think the examples that we showed here were pretty interesting and poignant, and certainly relevant for what we're going to be talking about for the next 30 or 40 minutes or so. So let me start talking about some risk-based testing essentials for IoT systems. And I want to start by one of the biggest banes of security professionals is that convenience often trumps security, and business requirements can often trump security if security and safety considerations have not been rolled out and included, similar to functional requirements and things like that. And building security in does take time, but this time to market pressure, it does often push security to the periphery and relegates it to be viewed as a tax. Now, of course, that's a real difficult position for an organization to be in if they're depending on IoT systems. But the end result is that consumers, whether they're internal to your business or your customers, they just want things to work, period. And what that means is that we often bypass simple security steps that can make attacking an IoT system just that much more difficult. Things like authentication or changing default login usernames and passwords, or in some cases, even having a login username and password. Again, we're going to cover this in the tips and tricks a little bit later on, but keep in mind that convenience and business risk are often trumping security. So we often get asked the question here at Security Innovation is, how is IoT testing different than other platforms like web applications and mobile or cloud applications? And the fact is they're not particularly different. In fact, most IoT systems that we've seen, even if it's just a couple of IoT devices deployed, they're usually communicating with some type of software application, whether it's a mobile application, a web application. Almost all of them have APIs because that's the easiest way to get data into and out of IoT systems and other types of applications. And especially with the proliferation of affordable and powerful IoT systems, many of them are now connected right to a cloud infrastructure as well for constant monitoring. The key point here is don't be too intimidated by IoT because there's no real magic involved. Yes, there's some new technologies to learn. Yes, there's some new protocols and things like that. But IoT is it's just a mashup of different types of technologies. And just like mobile applications and APIs and cloud infrastructure and web applications, it's mainly software controlled. And most of the risk is also emanating from software. So again, thanks to the International Journal of Web Portals and Mr. Vaughn at Security Innovation for contributing to some of that content. I've boiled down IoT security weak points to 4 fundamental areas. The first is security awareness. And this is why we're all sitting here on this webcast. That's why I take time out of my day to provide these types of webcasts, because humans continue to be the weak point, whether it's using IoT systems, building them themselves, or incorporating them into some enterprise IT system. So security awareness is probably the highest leveraged dollar spend that you can make. As soon as you increase awareness just a little bit, all of a sudden people start asking questions, and questions are the biggest friend to either an auditor or an assessor or a system administrator or any kind of security professional, because that's what you always want to be asking is these questions. And I've got probably a dozen questions later on to share with you. The second, which often is ignored or unrealized with IoT devices, is physical security. A lot of IoT devices have ports and interfaces, whether it's a USB port or some other way to access data, even if it's not wireless. And a lot of times they are abused and taken over by physical access, where insert a USB stick with malware, and all of a sudden you can control the entire digital camera or IP camera. Updates, probably the next most frequently ignored security defense. Firmware and apps, they need to be updated if a known security vulnerability is discovered. They'll often need to be updated just to keep up with the current protocol, or there's a new release of a version of a protocol. And just like those annoying software updates on your phone that tells you these 15 apps need to be updated, IoT devices need to be updated as well. And again, by far the most common security attack is exploiting a known security vulnerability. And most device manufacturers will publish when patches are available. Many publish why they're available and what's been fixed. However, just the fact that they're publishing a patch means something is wrong with the previous version and they want you to update. And understandably, a lot of times that's not the easiest thing to do, but it is the most common place of attack is unpatched software running on IoT devices. And then the last, which is also an important one, is data protection. IoT devices produce data, they consume data, they share data, and if they're doing this in unencrypted format, or they're doing this without any type of authentication, those are two major risk areas that need to be assessed and ideally mitigated. So there's a concept that's called shifting left. And it's not a new concept. In fact, it's been around for quite a long time. The place where I was able to lift this particular diagram at the bottom is from an article from Dr. Dobbs that Larry Smith wrote in, I believe, 2001. But the concept is to consider quality at very early stages of a system development lifecycle. And security is just another aspect of software quality, like functionality, performance, etc. And when you start incorporating security at early phases of a system development lifecycle, such as the requirements phase, you will start to ask questions that become very important, but also sometimes difficult to address, but most commonly just flat out ignored. And unfortunately, it could have been prevented, long ago. Now, that's the first of a couple things to consider. The second thing is that you need to allocate resources or account for resources that will be able to provide those updates. We talked about in the last slide the importance of patching and security updates, but who's going to do that? Are you going to count on the vendor to automatically push over-the-air updates that will automatically get your IoT device to the most current state? Well, that's a possibility if you have an appropriate maintenance agreement or service level agreement, but you may have to allocate internal staff to do it or depend on an IT team to do it or an operations team to do it. The point here is that you need to allocate some type of resource, whether it's dollars, a license agreement, or staff, to ensure that those updates actually happen, because that's the one place, as I mentioned in the previous slide, you're most likely to get attacked. And my key point here is that every component in an IoT system needs to be tested as part of the ecosystem, not just the device itself, not just the APIs, but all of it. And as we saw in the previous slide, IoT systems can get fairly complex fairly quickly, so documentation is really key in terms of when you start to get ready to conduct a security assessment. So I mentioned a couple of simple questions to start with, and I've provided a few of them here. Again, these are driven by business threats or business risks, and the idea of understanding the attack surface of the system that you're deploying. So the first question that I posit here is, how is the IoT system going to be deployed, and who owns all of the respective components? The reason you need to understand who owns all the respective components is because those folks are going to be the ones that will be primarily responsible for acting when something goes wrong. And on the next slide, I give you a sample of an IoT system with 6 rudimentary components, and we talk about ownership and threats. Next question is, how do we know what data is collected and stored and analyzed? Have we talked with legal about it? Imagine that. We're threatened with a lot of privacy issues these days, whether it's from GDPR or state of California here in the U.S. Issuing privacy requirements. Again, IoT systems do transmit, collect, store, in some cases, information. And is that information considered sensitive? What kind of governance policies need to be updated or at least adhered to if you're deploying something that has 1,000 sensors that are listening and then transmitting some kind of information. And then third, probably most important, is do we have a contingency plan in case one of our things gets attacked? And this, again, is something that you need to consider regardless of what thing you're putting into deployment. But with IoT, it gets a little bit more complicated because you don't necessarily own all of the infrastructure. And in many cases, you don't own most of it. And here's an example. So my suggestion here is start with assessing IoT risk and liability. So let's say you have an IoT system that has a device or devices connecting to a mobile and a web application, depending on the usage. Then there is data that gets transmitted and collected, and then there are one or two or more user roles or user functions. Well, for each one of those, consider who owns it. Are you the creator of the IoT devices, or is that a third-party vendor? In most enterprises, it's a third-party vendor. So you need to understand what the existing vulnerabilities are in each one of those IoT systems, and what's the patching process for that vendor. Same thing if you outsource mobile application development. In this example, I'm assuming that the fictional company is building its own web application, but outsourcing all mobile application development. So the two questions that I'd want to ask, for one being internal and one being external, is what is the secure software development lifecycle activity for vendor X or for team X, if it's internal? Same thing with data management. Are we practicing encryption? If so, what kind of encryption? Authentication. Is each role, is there some type of protection for each role? Required login, username, and information? Is there two-factor authentication that's required? If so, what does that look like? Can we even ask an IoT device to have multi-factor authentication? Maybe you only need multi-factor authentication if you're accessing the data that you're processing. But again, all of these are simple questions that if you address them early in the system development lifecycle, you'll probably lead to a much more rich assessment. And again, consider channels of transmission. If you have IoT devices that are communicating wirelessly, is that over cellular? Is it over Wi-Fi? Is it over some other type of infrastructure? And if it's over some type of transmission infrastructure that you don't own, what service level agreement do you have, and what guarantees do you have around securing that data? Is it transmitted in clear text? If not, how are they protecting it? Here is 7 best practices from the U.S. Federal Trade Commission on IoT security. And I'm not going to read them to you because you can easily see them for yourselves, and I also provide a reference at the bottom here. This is now coming up on 4 years old, FTC report on Internet of Things. And again, all of this is logical and basic, which is great, but it's really the how. So you train employees about the importance of security, great. How do I do that with respect to IoT systems? So this kind of tells you the what to do according to the U.S. Federal Trade Commission. The next level we have to get to is how do you do it? How do you monitor connected devices? How do you provide security patches for known risks? And this all goes back to those earlier slides when I was talking about make sure you have some type of allocation, whether it's budget, legal, or personnel, to provide security patching. Okay, next, this is going to be the only technical piece of the presentation, and it's not even going to get that technical. And the only reason that I am bringing this up is because there are some specific technology areas that you need to think about or potentially learn about when it comes to testing IoT devices. And the 6 main ones are component identification, firmware analysis, dynamic debugging, peripheral hacking, protocols, and hardware hacks. And I'm only going to spend time talking about a couple of these. The component identification classification is pretty straightforward. Most folks will understand how to go through a simple discovery process. So I do want to talk a little bit about the static firmware analysis. Firmware, it is software that has been integrated into the device itself. And firmware is a very rich source of potential hacks and exploitations. So you do want to consider analysis on the firmware if at all possible. Now, first and foremost, if you do intend to assess or analyze the firmware that's on an IoT device, please do make sure that you obtain approval from the vendor to do so, because it could, in some cases, be illegal, or you could be violating some kind of service level agreement. So definitely recommend that you obtain permission from a vendor whose IoT devices are in your system, and once you've obtained that, then there are a number of ways to assess the firmware itself. Many vendors actually publish the firmware binaries on their website. There are often support or community forums where you can download the firmware binaries. In more aggressive scenarios, you might have to reverse engineer the mobile application, or put a sniffer for the over-the-air update mechanism, which is what OTA stands for. Or the most difficult and challenging is actually doing a dump from the device itself. But there are tools that make these things a little bit easier, tools like Binwalk, IDA Pro, and Redare 2. They can be useful. The next thing that I want to talk about is protocols, because once you understand what the device is processing, you want to understand how it's communicating it. Is it over Wi-Fi? Is it Bluetooth low energy? Is it software-defined radio? Is it cellular? Is it just a physical connection with USB? And here, this is really no different than any other type of network-based testing, because the questions that you're asking and the discovery process you go through is pretty similar. What services are running, what communication ports are open, and what protocols are being used. And once you can understand that, you can also figure out what version it is and if there's a known vulnerability. And in fact, there's also a number of handy-dandy tools that can help you with that. If you have a software-defined radio protocol, there's this nifty little tool from New Electric. On iHackIoT.com, you can get all sorts of neat gadgets like the one shown at the bottom. And that little tiny USB transmitter, that is just an example of what a Bluetooth low energy device would look like. So all of these are freely available. Most of them are pretty inexpensive. And again, thanks to our friends over at Adify and the engineers here at Security Innovation for helping identify some specific tools that are available. Next, I'd like to transition into what to do. So we talked about how incredibly connected we are and some of the challenges that companies have run into with IoT devices. And then we talked a little bit of technology with the device itself. So I'm going to start by providing you 5 tips for IoT security. And this is essentially a simplified version of what the Federal Trade Commission came out with a few years ago. First is secure the device, operating system, and firmware. And the most convenient way to do that is to make sure that it has the most updated software and it's properly patched. The second is ensure that the data that is stored, collected, and transmitted from the device is appropriately protected. And appropriate could be encryption. It could be unnecessary if it's on a specific segment of the network that you have high trust. Third, secure the physical device. Again, very often overlooked element. Physical devices, they are often in plain sight, but that doesn't mean that they can't be attacked or hacked. And then the last one, which to me is a very important one, is around authentication, authorization. Earlier, I talked about the Mirai botnet attack and what happened to the company Dyn with the distributed denial of service, where half of the DNS services from the internet went down for a couple of days. Most of the IoT devices that got compromised either had no authentication or everything was left with default usernames and passwords, allowing for anyone that could discover the device to log into it and make edits and changes, and in this case, infect it with botnet, take it over, and then use it to take down the DNS servers. So authentication and authorization are very important considerations to not forget as you are going through these 5 steps. Now, what I've done in the next 5 slides is I've gone through and added some more specific information. So again, these are the 5 elements: secure the device, ensure protection, secure the physical device, etc. And then these next 5 slides, what I'm doing is I'm going through and just giving you examples of each one of those. So for the OS and firmware, we talked about making sure that updates, A, they happen, but B, when they happen, they are coming from an authorized source, and the easiest way to do that is ensure that they're signed. But also do things like full disk encryption. So if a device does get compromised or even stolen, that's another very common attack. The oldest trick in the book is grab and run. If the data on it is encrypted, most likely it'll be protected, or at least it'll be more difficult to extract. Sufficient data protection. Again, just, examples here of don't use hard-coded credentials if you can avoid it. Some devices have hard-coded credentials by default, as in the login username and password is admin or admin and no password. And if that is the case, find out how to change it. And if you can't change it, consider whether or not you actually want to use that device in your IoT system. And then all of the data access controls. Try to get any type of logging you can for that, because if something does go wrong, the one thing you want is a properly documented audit trail for your auditors or your forensic scientists who are coming in. Next is the physical device. We've talked about this quite a bit, but ensuring anti-tamper, whether it's disabling ports or limiting functionalities for devices that are not on premises or within control of known trusted personnel. And then 4 out of 5 is securing the communication channel. And here, you may not always have full control, but that which you do have control over, ensure that it is secured, and secured with encryption, with passwords, with specific modes of protocol communication that you might be able to completely disable. There are a lot of features and functions that come with many IoT devices that frankly you don't need to have in place. So consider disabling those and launching with just a system that has the least amount of functionality you need to achieve the business requirements. Too many times we've seen exploits of features that companies didn't even know were enabled on a certain device or a certain application. Again, could be as simple as disabling all ports other than the 1 or 2 you might need in order to communicate the data that you want coming in and out of those devices. And 5, authentication and authorization. I think we've talked about this enough, but strong password policy, having a password policy, and wherever you can, some type of second factor authentication, especially for any type of privileged account. If it's an admin, if it's access to your cloud application that's storing and analyzing all this data, whether it's for monitoring or analytics, those are the places where you really need to consider multi-factor authentication. And oftentimes it's frankly impossible to instantiate multi-factor authentication on an IoT device itself just due to manufacturing constraints. So I've got 2 slides here that talk about some tips. Specifically, I summarize them up here in 5 pretty straightforward steps, and then I have another slide that talks about how to engage with security professionals, because for a lot of us, struggling with newly deployed systems and new or newer technology like IoT, engaging with a security professional certainly can help tremendously. So highly recommend that. From the 5 tips,
first of all, knowing your vendor's track record, that's critically important. Update your evaluation process to include known vulnerabilities in any IoT device or system that you're considering. Second is security awareness training. Earlier in the presentation, we mentioned how the human factor is still, the number one risk for most enterprises. And when I say security awareness training, yes, I do mean the, don't click on X, Y, and Z training, but also, and very important, is the technical configuration, technical training for IT operations teams, especially around configuration, because misconfiguration vulnerabilities are extremely common in IoT systems. And this has really nothing to do with how the IoT device or system might be built, but it's how it's deployed. Keeping in mind that many IoT systems have components such as APIs, a web application, cloud infrastructure that is communicating with, and all of those are potential misconfiguration vulnerabilities. Penetration testing, been around since the dawn of technology and highly recommended for IoT systems. Once again, remember to obtain the rights for any third parties that are providing elements to your IoT system. Fourth is defense in depth strategy. Again, age-old security best practice, which is great. In IoT, if you do have a system where you've got mobile applications and web applications and IoT devices and APIs and cloud infrastructure, you can utilize traditional IT technology like a web application firewall, to help combat attacks like SQL injection and things like that. And finally, very importantly, eliminate all hard-coded or default passwords, because these essentially create a backdoor right into all of your systems. This URL here on the screen, and again, this presentation, the slides will be emailed to you if you send me an email. My contact info is coming up in just a moment. There's an IoT security toolkit that will give you some additional details on securing IoT systems. As I mentioned a moment ago, just a comment on engaging with security professionals. They can be extremely helpful, and there's a number of different ways in which you can engage them. And first of all, have a chat with us. We've got a lot of folks taking time out of their day to sit here on a webcast and listen to me, which is great. I thank you for that. But don't be afraid to pick up the phone and call your favorite security professional, whether it's Security Innovation or some other organization. Bug bounty programs are also quite popular these days and becoming very effective, particularly with large software vendors. The idea there is that you clearly define what is in and what is out of scope, and then you invite security researchers to essentially hack a system or an application and provide you security information about security vulnerabilities privately or responsibly, and then you reward them for it, whether it's with cash, a cool T-shirt, some kind of neat device. That's the concept. It does work very well. I know many organizations are a little bit hesitant to jump into that, but I'm happy to talk with anyone about that in further detail and show you examples of very successful bug bounty programs. Third, non-hostile relationships with security researchers, and yes, I've air quoted researchers because there is some debate between security professionals and security researchers as far as what exactly they're researching. Are they truly a black hat? Are they a white hat, or are they a gray hat that maybe dabbles in both areas? The point here, though, is that I want to make is that taking a non-hostile approach is probably going to get you a lot more goodwill and a lot more useful information. Very often, security researchers will find a security vulnerability and they'll want to disclose it responsibly, not publicly. They want to disclose it responsibly, but they don't know how. There's either no information about where to go or to whom to speak. And so often, information will come in over an info at email alias. And if they don't have any type of response, they get frustrated. Worse yet, if they get a very hostile response, such as "I'm going to sue you," that is a potential arms race that you don't necessarily want to get involved with. Remember, this is a security researcher that knows about a security vulnerability in one of your IT systems already. So I don't recommend going after them with an aggressive stance. In fact, one of our engineers used an analogy of it's like me telling you that your fly is down or your shoe is untied, and you punching me in the nose for noticing. It's not the kind of hostile relationship that we recommend. Fourth here is a vulnerability disclosure program. This is really sort of documentation to help the number 2 and number 3 on this list. It's documentation, public documentation of how to report a vulnerability in one of your systems that becomes discoverable, either accidentally or intentionally. And then finally, form a direct relationship with some independent third party. Yeah, and don't be afraid to share information, good, bad, or ugly, with your peers, whether it's part of an ISAC, an information sharing group, or even informally at conferences and trade shows. All of these 5 or 6 recommendations here can be useful to you and can provide you with some very rich information. Finally, I have listed here both my email address and my Twitter handle. Feel free to drop me a line on either one. If there are questions, I'm going to jump over to that question and answer portal right now. However, feel free to email me if you want a copy of the slides, if you want the IoT tip sheet, if you want a white paper on mitigating IoT risk, all of it is available and written by qualified professionals who actually know what they're doing. So with that, I'm going to jump over to the question and answer portal. Thank you for your time. And I'm going to answer these questions in text, which is the best way for me to do it here on the Bright Talk panel. So thank you very much for your time, and I will answer the few questions that have come up. In the meantime, enjoy the rest of your day, and I wish you all well.